as I've seen most consistently over 30 years of counseling people, occurs in women in roughly their mid-30s, extending into the 40s and 50s, and it's two simple phrases. One, I'm tired of being strong, and two, I just want someone who gives a shit. And I've workshopped those two phrases to different women's groups that I've led, from business owners, single moms, everything in between, and I've asked them, what's at the root of this? And we drill down, and what is extremely prevalent is the belief, I don't matter. So many women spend so much energy holding up others, serving others, taking care of others at the expense of filling their own love cup. And so their energy becomes depleted over time, and they get tired of being strong. And in the case of I just want someone who gives a shit, so many women have been raised to believe that they don't matter. It's about serving the other person and giving, when they maybe should have cut it off far sooner when they realized they weren't getting any response. And so my simple question to you is, who taught you that you don't matter, and what's the fucked up effect it's having on your fucking life?
I'm seeing more and more motherfucking evidence blowing to shit this notion that men aren't in tune to their real selves and aren't into therapy and self-growth. I had a client, blue-collar guy, moving up into management level, outdoors, fucking in the cold type fucking work, and he was having beers with a guy who's sort of parallel to him in the company. They're talking about therapy and how they've been getting their shit out and how it's helping their fucking marriages, and they just feel better and they're enjoying their work more as a result. Another guy in his early 50s got on a Zoom call with me and his 18-year-old son, who's a successful athlete, smart kid, and the father's just opening up the door for the son to unload all of his pain and all the shit that the father has done to hurt him and so forth. And it was a beautiful conversation. You would have never believed it if you fucking saw it. Third thing, I was invited to the bachelor weekend of a client of mine. We did some basketball, I had some beers, and at one of the dinners, one of the guys says, hey, let's go around the table and say what we love the most about the bachelor. It's fucking beautiful, man. Men are changing. It's a good thing. Have a kick.
Have you ever had the experience where you're out on your own in life and you're out there and you're just feeling alone or you're feeling down, and you give a call back to the people that you want love from to sort of pick you up and help you get the pain off your chest and sort of have an encouraging word, usually mom or dad, and you go back and you talk with them, maybe you talk to them a few times, and your pain actually gets worse because you realize that they cause more pain than they alleviate, and very often the pain that you're experiencing off in that new place on your own or alone is generally tracks back to them. And so the very ones that you're trying to get relief from are the very ones causing more pain. And what we realize is down beneath that is you're still wanting something from them. We keep going back to the ones who have caused us the pain and who continue to cause us pain because we still want something. We still maybe want them to say, you're right, and I'm sorry. We want them to say, Jesus, I really did all this shit. I feel so bad. We're wanting them to pick us up and they still never do it. Is that your case? Have a kick-ass day.
Client came to me yesterday saying, Sven, I want to move forward in this new relationship, but I realized part of me is still stuck in the past with my ex. And as we dug around some more, what we discovered was that my client was still harboring a lot of pain and a lot of anger towards the ex as a result of that pain. And what we discovered was my client was really wanting an acknowledgement of the pain by the ex that they caused to my client. That was the first thing. Second realization that my client had was, holy shit, that means my ex is still controlling my future and future relationships. Not good. Third realization, as we went into other parts of this person's life, was my client realized as we came back to this relationship, holy shit, I was at fault too. And as a result of realizing that fault, my client was no longer feeling justified in holding on to the anger and that it was all the other person's fault. That acknowledging the person's own fault had the effect of being able to let go and move forward. So what hatred and anger and convinced you're right are you holding on to that's keeping you from moving forward? One of the single most frequent questions I get from people is, Sven, I've got two options I just can't choose between. What do I do? What do I do? And what do I really want? I can't figure it out. And I say, that's bullshit. And they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? I say, you've got one thing you really want, and then you've got one thing you're considering because you're terrified of going after what you want, because you're terrified of the fucking blowback you're gonna get from people around you. You know exactly what people are gonna say, and you are terrified, not of the unknown, you're terrified of the known. You know exactly what they're gonna say. And so my question to you is, whose voice are you so terrified of that you're considering not even going after what you really want, but doing something completely different because it's safer? Whose voice is causing you to second guess your own self? And lastly, if you can't even hear your own voice, you don't even have that option, that says somebody has burrowed so far up your ass and so far into your fucking head, you can't even hear your own voice. So at what point do you finally have the courage to get all these fucking voices out of your head so that you can see what you want and go after it full speed ahead with your hair on fire? Have a
simple little very fucked up question for you today, and it's simply this. If they don't need you, why the hell would they even want you? Is that your thinking?
that you work so fucking hard for people and serving them, and that you're meeting all of their needs, just hoping they'll love you some in return. You work so hard to make people love you and want you, just hoping to get some love in return. And what's underlying that is the belief that if they don't need me and if I'm not serving them, why the hell would they ever want me? In other words, I am intrinsically who I am, not good enough. I am intrinsically who I am just by being me, rather than always doing. Who I am intrinsically, in and of itself, is not worthy of love. Despite the bravado I may put on, despite how much I may shrink in fear, despite how much I may say how fucking great I am, deep down, if you're working that hard to make people fucking like you, you don't like yourself. Is that you? Have a kick-ass.
With a parent or parents who criticized you a lot as a child. One of the phenomena I see most in adults who come to me where they grew up in a home where the person who claimed to love them most actually inflicted the most damage is that child, as we look back and dive deeper in our conversation, that they, as children, engaged in a self-protection mechanism known simply as lying. That the child realized that if I tell the truth, my father or my mother is always going to find a way to criticize me, put me down, laugh at me, cause me to doubt myself. No matter what grades I bring home, they're always going to find something wrong. And so the child says it's far safer to lie. And it's very easy to go through life and say, oh, all lying is bad, all lying is bad. No, it's not. That sometimes the child has to lie to save themselves, to protect themselves from the very person they shouldn't have to protect themselves from. That becomes problematic, however, when it's no longer necessary. When the child moves into adulthood, very often what I discover with my clients is that need to self-protect just morphs into a habit. They find themselves lying all the time. I had a client just the other day who said to me, Sven, I'd lie over the stupidest shit. And I didn't even ask myself, why the fuck am I lying about that? It doesn't even make sense. Who cares? And it really becomes problematic, not just when it's habitualized, but when you realize that habit of lying for no reason whatsoever, or that habit of lying for self-protection, is undermining your relationships. And it undermines relationships because what is necessary for two people to bond is vulnerability. What is necessary for true love to flourish is the willingness to show you who I really am. If brutal honesty is pointing out what's always wrong with other people, which anybody can do, radical honesty is pointing out what's wrong with me. Radical honesty is revealing my fears, revealing my anxieties, revealing my dreams, my aspirations. But if you've habitualized lying as a self-protection mechanism, and it worked and it was good and necessary back then, now it becomes highly problematic because you're going to lie. Why? Because this is scary shit. To reveal to someone else who you really are is scary fucking shit. Easier to lie. Yeah, well, good luck with your relationship if you're always hiding the real shit, if you're always lying. Even if you don't mean to hurt the other person, you don't want to get hurt yourself. So my simple question for you today is, who taught you to lie? Who taught you that they weren't safe? And is it possible that that habit of lying is undermining the very thing you claim to want most, which is A, a real relationship with your own self, and B, real connections with other people? And at what point do you fucking change? Have a kick-ass day. A very dear friend of mine was starring in the first national tour of a Broadway show, and I happened to be visiting her while she was on the road for the tour down south in what was her hometown. And I actually sat with her mother that night because I'd known her mother for decades. And then afterwards, the three of us went out to dinner. And her mother, of course, true to character, I later realized her mother was making comments like, well, you know, in the pas de deux, your hair was atrocious. Why did you have it that way? And Jennifer, have you put on a little weight? You look a little thicker. And Jennifer, oh, I didn't like that last number at all. And things like that. And after her mother went home, Jennifer and I went and just had a few cocktails. And Jennifer said, Sven, it hit me. It literally hit me. I'm sitting there at dinner with you and Mom, and it hit me that I have spent 40 years. She's starring in a fucking Broadway show at age 40. I've spent 40 fucking years trying to win that woman's approval, trying to get her to be proud of me or just say a nice fucking word, and I'm never gonna get it. 40 years. They don't tell us when we're 20, nobody tells us when we're 20 that ultimately you're facing a choice when you're 20. And the choice is either decide to become myself and disappoint the parent now at 20, at 22, at 28, to stand up for myself and become my real self and go after what I want, knowing that it's gonna cost me their approval, knowing they're gonna be pissed, knowing they're gonna pull back support, whatever it might be. Either choose me now or at 40 or at 45 or at 60.
look back and realize I'm never gonna get it. And I've wasted 20 fucking years trying to win the approval of people who had no intention of ever giving it. And see, that's the trick. That's the problem. When you're 20, you don't know that's what you're facing. Nobody fucking tells you that. But you gotta choose that. And so part of what my dear friend Jennifer was grieving, she was grieving the loss of the last 20 years, even though she had fucking started a Broadway show. She felt like her last 20 years had been a fucking waste. So at what point do you accept yourself? At what point do you approve of yourself? And just for the record, it's not always the critical parent that we have to differentiate ourselves from. Very often, it's a loving parent, a supportive parent that the young person doesn't want to deviate from because they look up to the parent so much, or not because the parent will be critical, but just maybe because the kid is no longer like the parent, but wants to go their own path and fears letting the parent down. So what is it for you? Are you wasting the time now? Are you ready to finally stand up and become who you really are?
I require three things before I ever begin counseling a client. One, they have to write an autobiography that I get before the session so that when we start, I already know their whole life story and we can hit the ground running. Two, I tell every single client, no matter how much you've failed, fucked up, and fallen down in your lifetime, I've failed, fucked up, fallen down, and hurt people more in my lifetime than you will in 7 lifetimes. So I'm the last motherfucker on earth who can be judging anyone. Third thing is I tell them, no matter what we discuss, there's never an expectation of action. Never. And this gets really critical in those deep conversations where we're really looking at the past. They need to know they never have to act. Because so often in life we feel like if I say something, then I have to do something about it. I short circuit that process. I just want to look at the talking about it, getting the real shit out. Because once they realize they don't have to act, then we can uncover the blind spots. We can go deep into stuff and just let it sit there and let it ruminate and so forth. And if they want to take action later, great, I support them 100%. But the most important stuff is getting it up and out there. So in your counseling, in your own journaling, with your friends, do you feel safe to talk without being judged, to talk without having to
tell me yesterday, yes, man, I've gotten over all of my father stuff. I've worked through it all. Yes, he was abusive and so forth, but I forgave him about 5-6 years ago. And I said, you forgave him, and did that feel good to him? And he said, oh yeah, it relieved a big burden. He felt great and so on and so forth. I said, what did it do for you? He thought. He said, not a goddamn thing. I said, exactly. Forgiveness is optional. Forgiveness doesn't solve anything if you don't get your own feelings out first, because otherwise you are just denying that child that was harmed at 6 or 8 or 12, harming him again, but you're doing it this time because you are continuing to make sure that child's voice is silenced. And all you do by forgiving without getting your own pain and anger and hurt out is you pack it down even further. Oh, sure, it may improve the relationship. Oh, sure, they may love you a little bit for it, but you're hating on yourself. Is it you? One simple fucking question for you today, and it's this. Do you get triggered? Do you get triggered? I'm in Minneapolis for the double funeral of both my parents who died during COVID in the early 90s. And it has me reflecting on past, present, and future. And see, triggering indicates that your past is running your present, because being triggered means you have some memory in your past that has an emotional charge attached to it. You have not decharged that memory or that set of memories. And so when something happens in your present, it's electrifying, it's igniting that emotional charge, and it's causing you to get agitated and fucking, right? And then you feel shitty and you make shitty decisions and you treat people like shit. So your past is influencing, driving, determining your present. And so the question becomes, at what point in your fucking life do you pull out all your memories and decharge them? That's what I wrote my fucking book for, and people journal and go to counseling for. To what degree are you either running from your past, or is it in fact driving your life, and when do you fix it?
One of the single biggest indicators of not just the long-term viability of your relationship, but your happiness within that relationship, because plenty of relationships go long-term, but people ain't fucking happy. One of the single biggest determinants is the degree to which you romanticize the other person. And not just romanticize the relationship, but who they are and the decisions they make and how they treat you. Because how much you romanticize them is directly correlated to the amount of truth that you are denying, withholding, not wanting to look at with regard to them. And so that also is a direct correlation to how happy you are within the context of that fucking relationship. The more truth that you are denying or withholding, the less your happiness. Why? Because you're running from something. You don't want to see who they really are. You don't want to see how they really treat you. You don't want to admit that they don't love you. They may say shit, they may have feelings, but ultimately their actions indicate that they don't love you, or they don't love you nearly as much as you want to be loved. And it's more comfortable, it's easier to deny that, to not look at that, and just hope and wish maybe it'll get better, right? Than it is to look at it and say, this sucks. And where it really gets bad is not just within the context of a love relationship, but of a parent relationship. To what degree are you romanticizing who your parent or parents really are and how they treat you? To what degree do you need to hold on to a romanticized version of how they treat you and who they are, because you can't bear to look at the truth, or perhaps you've been alone from the beginning. They haven't loved you. They certainly haven't shown it in their actions. To what degree are you romanticizing people? What is the percentage of your happiness that you're sacrificing as a result? And at what point do you begin to look at life truthfully and live authentically? You honoring your voice and your needs more than anyone else clearly isn't. Have a kick-ass day.
One of the phenomena I see very frequently is I've been working with somebody for a couple of months, and because I do couple-hour sessions, we don't necessarily work together every single week, but we make massive progress, and they experience growth and happiness and peace like they've never experienced before. And then they choose, after a couple of months, to drop off from working with me directly, in part because I'm teaching them all these tools. My goal is to get them off of my tit so they can begin to experience life on their own. But very often people will pull themselves off of the tit sooner than they're ready, which is fine. And I encourage them, hey, come back whenever you need to. And they darken my door again in about a month or 2 months, and they say, shit, Sven, I'm in a worse depression than I was in before I even started with you. I said, yeah, because what you're in now is juxtaposed against the euphoria you experienced when we were working together. I said, but it's like going to the gym. You have to keep going. You don't just stop once you see your first bicep or lose your first 10 pounds. You stopped your disciplines, didn't you? All the shit that I taught you, they're like, yeah, Sven, how the fuck do you know? I said, you got to do this more and more. And as you do it, you'll go through life and shit will knock you down less and less. So what do you got to stick with? Yourself. One of my all-time absolute favorite quotes is from one of my all-time absolute favorite authors by the name of Richard Bach. He wrote a book back in the 70s, late 70s, entitled Illusions, The Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah. And the quote is simply this: argue for your limitations, and sure enough, they're yours. Think about that. What is it in your life that is a limitation that you argue for, you defend, you consider your absolute motherfucking reality? What is it? And what if it's not true? What if you are selling the idea that this limitation is my absolute truth and it was never true to begin with? Wow. What if you're the one holding you back? Have a kick-ass day.